morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be joined by the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi for both the Security Summit and a live taping of my podcast, The Conversation. I want to talk about the latest in the war, but before we get to that, tens of thousands of Iranians have been killed, arrested, tortured by the Iranian regime since those massive protests broke out late last year. The regime has executed at least 190 people so far this year, including a grad student in Tehran just this week. So I want to start with, what is your message to the Iranian people right now?
First of all, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm so glad you asked me the question, because just last month when I was touring many countries in Europe and had several press conferences, not a single reporter even brought up the issue of what's happening in Iran today, of so many people that were killed, and the fact that the real war that has been going on is a war that the regime started against our own people 47 years ago, that has never stopped. There hasn't been a ceasefire on the people of Iran. Executions are continuing almost on a daily basis. As of the last 2 weeks, we had over 28 confirmed executions that occurred in Iran. And this is really why this struggle is so important and vital to us. This is not just about the national security of the United States or stability in the world. It's about the liberation of a nation that, unlike this regime that has been chanting death to America from its inception, we are a nation that, once free, would like to be the best partners and allies to the regional partners that we have in the Arab countries and, of course, Israel, but also the United States. What's at stake here is a complete changing of the circumstances, and which is why this conflict, as we see it, has to be seen through. And this is what is the biggest expectation of my fellow compatriots, that despite the crackdown, despite the fact that now more than 70 days of total internet blackout, where they have had no means to communicate with the outside world, they are still resilient, but they are hoping that all this sacrifice has not been in vain, and that finally they'll be able to be liberated as a result of this regime being brought down to its knees.
To that point, I want to talk about this moment in the war and get your take on how this administration has been handling the conflict. Are you satisfied with how President Trump has been moving through this here?
Well, President Trump is the first American president since the Iranian Revolution that has actually taken the issue to the extent of doing something about it. And I think it's an action that was welcomed by many of my compatriots. As a matter of fact, when the whole campaign started, people have been naming streets after him in Iran because he promised that help would come, and he did stick to his word. The question, however, is, what do we do now? I know a lot of people have been saying, should diplomacy be given a chance? Of course it should. But then again, don't we know by now the nature of this regime? Don't we know by now that in its DNA, it is incapable of coming to terms with coexistence with a free democratic world? It has as a mission to export an ideology. It is doing so by means of its proxies. And by the way, the proxies are not just limited to the Middle East. It's not just about Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. They have networks and sleeper cells operating on European and Western Hemisphere soil, including the United States. They are using these elements to radicalize people, to brainwash them, to provoke even more anti-American sentiments here, and same thing in Europe, targeting various citizens of various countries on their own soil. This is part of the problem when you're dealing with this kind of regime. It's not just a menace to its own citizens. It's not just a menace to the regional countries. It is a menace to the entire free world. And therefore, when we say that now that you have a wounded beast, this is not an opportunity that you should let go. This is an opportunity to finish the job and get it over with. This is, I think, what is the expectation, not just millions of Iranians, but I think many countries in the region who now understand that there's no way possible to deal with this regime.
So to that point, I mean, the president has been giving signals that he doesn't want to escalate. He says he wants to make a deal, but from what you've seen and what you know of this regime, do you think that the U.S. should make a deal with Iran right now?
I don't know if you can ever, as I said, there's no way you can make a deal with a regime that is inherently incapable of saying that we are willing to give up everything that is the reason we still exist and think that they will be able to change their behavior. As a matter of fact, the biggest flaw in the rationale in whatever the foreign policy of so many Western countries have been, including the US governments, for years has been a change of behavior by the regime. For years, the attempt of appeasing the regime was the overall strategy of many governments. But appeasement has failed, and as a result, we've seen that the regime was to some extent emboldened. Previous administrations allowed the regime to have access to billions of dollars that they obviously did not spend on the people of Iran and their needs, but to further strengthen their proxies. All of that brought us to a point that it escalated the situation that conflict became inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, given what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz and how the president has been navigating the diplomacy in the last few weeks, do you think there's risk of that appeasement and emboldening Iran right now?
If you believe the fact that there still exists such so-called moderate elements that you could deal with, you're falling back in the same trapping that the regime has laid out for decades to make you think that there are some elements that are more manageable and more reasonable that can be dealt with. The problem is that such a thing doesn't truly exist. They're just people that ultimately are there to preserve the system. And yes, the regime has been weakened, but it's the radical elements that are the most elements in charge. And if there are any so-called moderates, which I don't believe they are, they really don't have a big role to play. So therefore, you're facing now a system that has become a de facto paramilitary dictatorship. It's the IRGC that controls ultimately everything.
So do you want to see U.S. boots on the ground at this point?
I think that the best way to articulate this is to say that, and that's something that we have said, that the boots on the ground in Iran are the Iranian people themselves. We don't need to have foreign troops doing the job for us. But in order for people to be emboldened and have a fair fighting chance, unlike what happened in January 8th and 9th when they were massacred to the tune of over 40,000 people in less than 48 hours, how could you expect the people to be the elements on the ground if they don't get the appropriate protection or cover? We can only call to this action by people being on the streets again when they have that level of an equal fighting chance, not while the regime can deploy their thugs to murder people on the streets. That's why we needed to have the air campaign. That's why we needed to have the aerial protection. And I think that's where you can generate the element on the grounds that will not require the use of foreign troops doing that job. And in order to transfer to that, however, you have to have a clear message. You have to have a clear strategy of aiming for putting an end to this regime, allowing for people to revolt, allowing for elements within the military and security forces to defect and join with the people. All of that has to be coordinated as a coherent strategy. You cannot send mixed signals. On the one hand, say people need to rise, and at the same time say, wait, we are negotiating. It's confusing the hell out of everyone. And I think this is the kind of issue that has been a little bit a concern for all of us watching and observing how the situation is unfolding.
It's impossible to know the exact death toll right now, but thousands of Iranian citizens, including children, have been killed as a result of this war. Do you think a return to a bombing campaign is worth the price on the ground?
Look, hitting the regime where it hurts is the infrastructure that the regime is using against its own citizenry. The targeting that we saw was clearly an element that aimed at neutralizing elements that the regime would use as elements of coercion or repression of its own citizenry. Obviously targeting the intelligence apparatus of the state, the IRGC or anything attached to that. This is exactly what the people were, in fact, happy to see happen. People are smart enough to know the difference between being attacked as a nation as opposed to the regime being attacked. And clearly that campaign was not an attack against the nation, it was an attack against the regime, which was necessary.
Do you think there's any risk, though, of radicalizing some in the Iranian population against the U.S. and Israel as a result of these attacks?
That's not what we hear inside Iran. In fact, again, one of the reasons the regime wants a total internet blackout is that people like yourselves won't hear what the people in Iran actually have to say about this. The narrative is controlled completely by the regime, and that's what it's trying to push whether it's the mainstream media in the outside world, to lead you to believe that people are in fact rejecting that intervention. It's actually quite the opposite. Of course, there are some elements that are affiliated with the regime that will take a contrary viewpoints, but the majority of the Iranian people look at this as a liberation campaign. Imagine the circumstances during the Second World War. Imagine you were a French person who was living under the occupation of the Nazi regime. And when the Allies disembarked on the British of Normandy, that was a campaign for liberation of a country that would otherwise have to face Hitler and his regime. In this case, we are dealing with a regime that has from the very beginning taken our compatriots as their first hostages and have kept them behind bars. This intervention is a liberation for us. So it's a welcome act that will help us finally get rid of this regime, which is the final ask of the Iranian people. They've had it with this regime. They no longer want it. This regime is totally illegitimate. It's just trying to use coercion and fear to maintain itself in power and try to buy time and ride the storm so there's no longer a Bibi Netanyahu in Jerusalem or a Donald Trump in the White House that could really put pressure on this regime. That's why tactically they're just trying to buy time, and that has always been their modus operandi in all these years.
The strikes, unfortunately, have not exclusively hit the regime and the regime's infrastructure. There's been reporting that hundreds of civilians, including 200 school children, were killed in a single strike. President Trump has also threatened to destroy Iran's civilian infrastructure and, quote, wipe out Iran's civilization if the Iranian government didn't make a deal. Do you think that kind of rhetoric is appropriate, even as a negotiating tactic?
No, it's not, because again, it's part of sending the missed signal. Are you here to liberate us or further hurt us? What hurts our nation is its, of course, civilian infrastructure. What helps us is when you hit the regime and its infrastructure. I'm trying to separate the two from each other. And yes, nobody likes to see victims. But then again, the regime has been using people. Do you think the US and Israel has done enough to separate those two? Well, that's what I'm trying to address. Look, when the regime adapts in tactics to use people as human shields, as they would hide many aspects of their anti-riot forces or whatever you want to call it in public areas, including schools and hospitals, a little bit a la what Hamas has been doing in Gaza. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to have precision targeting without having every now and then these instances. It's very sad, but it's war, it's conflict. The sooner we put an end to this regime, the sooner we can in fact preserve more innocent lives from being destroyed in my country. I think it's important for the world to consider that to us Iranians, when you look at what's happening, it's an opportunity for us to get rid of this regime once and for all. And yes, we do need some outside help. And yes, help did arrive. And the campaign that was led both by the Israelis and the Americans, but to that extent successful to at least hurt the regime and diminish its capability to counteract about the people. Is it enough to solve the problem? No. And I think that's where we are saying that rather than thinking that this time you can come to terms with this regime, you might as well get rid of it once and for all and liberate yourselves from all the threats that it represents to you, but also at the same time help us regain our freedom.
But at this point, President Trump has sort of backed away from the idea of regime change. But I had Leon Panetta, U.S. Defense Secretary under President Obama, on the conversation last week. He told me that he doesn't think this war can end without regime change. And while the regime has been weakened by the death of Ayatollah Khamenei and other IRGC leaders, it is still in place. I mean, do you think that regime change is a real possibility at this point, given how much they've shown they can survive?
And of course, it is a possibility, but more than a possibility, it is a necessity. That's what we need to really stress here. And yes, in this town, regime change has gotten a bad name. Why? Because, of course, it was poorly implemented elsewhere. Example, Iraq and Saddam Hussein's de-Baathification. This is certainly not the scenario that we are professing. Just because it was poorly handled elsewhere doesn't make the concept wrong. It is still a necessary step to be taken. And contrary to what we saw recently in the Middle East, what we are calling for is a smooth and stable transition beyond the regime to an ultimate secular democratic outcome. For that, we have a plan, we have a strategy. I have developed this on a 5-pronged basis. It continues to be an element of maximum pressure on the regime, maximum support for the Iranian people, maximum defections within Iran, and of course, part of it is the Iran Prosperity Project that addresses exactly what happens day one after the regime collapses. So you're not faced with chaos. There's no vacuum to worry about. It can be filled, and I'm not getting into details here because it's quite comprehensive. But basically, that means that there shouldn't be the concern of, well, can the situation get worse? Are we going to face a chaotic situation? No, but to that we need to assure whoever is looking at this, including here in the US, what it would mean to have regime change in Iran, how it can happen, what are the mechanics for it.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit more into the mechanics because, you were a big supporter of the widespread anti-government protests that led in part to this moment in Iran. At one point, you told Politico that more than 50,000 members of Iran's security forces and government had contacted you to defect from the regime. Where are those 50,000? It doesn't seem like there's a real internal opposition at this point.
Well, of course, I think that's the opposition inside Iran is quite diverse and quite united. And in fact, when a call to action on January 8th and 9th came, in all 31 provinces of Iran, people rose and came to the streets chanting the same slogans and as unified as ever.
But where are those regime defectors that you talked about?
Well, obviously, these are people who are waiting for the opportunity to peel away. It goes back to my previous point when I said if you're sending mixed signals, okay, let me put it this way. Imagine you are a high-ranking member of the Iranian Erdیبهشت, which is the military, or maybe their counterparts within the IRGC. And you know that this regime days are numbered. You don't want to go down with the ship. You don't want to face the consequences of having to account for it one day towards the Iranian people. Some of them who don't have their bloods on their hands want to survive regime change. That's in fact part of our calculation, giving them amnesty, giving them the possibility to survive regime change so they don't have a fear of what will happen to us next. So looking at them as a solution as opposed to a problem to face. But then they would be hesitating if one time they say, well, what if we expose ourselves? What if we were to commit to join with the opposition? If it's a half-baked solution, if we are thinking that, hold on a second, they're trying to cut a deal with this regime, or they might be the survival of this regime because now diplomacy has led to a sort of a temporary ceasefire or whatever it is, they will hesitate. I'm sure anybody with a simple, rational mind will understand the reason why they will not be fully committed, not because they don't want to, but because they still don't know if they have a firm ground on the other end. But if the message is clear that this time we're taking the regime down, the people of Iran will stand, you can now join with the people, you can now safely defect and not having to worry about the regimes retaliating against you, that creates the opportunity. Now, we have cultivated these assets within Iran who have contacted us. Obviously, we have to make sure that their identity is protected because if they're exposed prematurely, the regime will obviously eliminate them. So it's a very delicate process that we're talking about. And that is not just limited to the military and paramilitary infrastructure, that also includes the civil bureaucracy. We're thinking that the majority of the people currently functioning in the system should be part of the elements that post-regime collapse will continue to maintain the functioning of the state. So during that time, we can have the transitional government prepare the grounds for what will lead to the ultimate process.
Do you think President Trump and the administration understand the argument that you're making? Have you been able to have any version of this conversation with them?
Well, I've been talking both to members of Congress and, of course, passing on these messages and ideas to the administration. I'm sure there are many people within the administration who understand a lot better what it is that we're talking about. Example, Secretary Rubio, who I've met before he became Secretary of State when he was a senator, who really understands what's at stake very well. So I'm sure there are many people within the President Trump's administration who understand or have a better understanding of what it is that we are suggesting. The focus right now has been, of course, what do we do, in terms of this negotiation. It doesn't look like the message back from Tehran is positive, at least based on what we hear is the response from the White House. But again, having said that, how long is this process going to be delayed? When is the deadline for it? And as a result of that, if there's no bargain, then what? Is it a resumption of the conflict? And then conflict with what aim? If the idea is to prevent America having to commit forces on the ground, reason more to now help the Iranian people so they can be the boots on the ground. But that has to be a clear strategy. You cannot have it half-baked. That's my whole point today, is to make sure that this administration, whoever is listening to us, understand that you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say, people will keep you on ice, and we'll tell you when we're ready. In the meantime, we are attempting to figure something else. This is a very hard way to convince people that you're serious about it. If you're really serious about it, people have already proven that they're willing to sacrifice their lives for their liberation. They just hope that this time they're not alone, that they're not going to be thrown under the bus yet again. And I think this president has been very strong with what he's done. I'm only here to encourage the fact that stay the course, get the job done. And I know that today it's not just the Iranian people, but I think there are many other countries in the region who have been facing the regime's retaliation, who understand that as long as this regime continues to exist, the problem will never be solved, irrespective of to what extent you think you would have achieved some kind of a diplomatic solution. I doubt that the regime will give up its nuclear material. I doubt they will put an end to their proxy support. I doubt that they will stop funding terrorism abroad. These are the kind of elements, as I said, that is part of its DNA. So I cannot envisage the fact that the regime will be willing to concede on all those points and possibly be able to survive. Even if it is to satisfy their own base, they cannot commit to that. And their base is going to be exactly what keeps the RGC in place, and I don't think they're going to relinquish on that.
So if the regime were to fall, you've been positioning yourself as the leader of the transition. You haven't set foot in Iran in 50 years. President Trump has said that he's not sure if you have enough support within Iran to take over. And your critics say that you're being propped up by the American and Israeli government. What do you say to Iranians inside and outside of the country who want the current regime to fall, but don't see you as the next leader?
Well, I think that millions of people who answered my call are the living proof of the fact that I have tremendous amount of support within Iran. And again, as I said, the minute this internet blackout is lifted, you'll be able to hear exactly what the people in Iran have to say. As a matter of fact, right before the internet shut down, my last messages were heard by the millions inside Iran. Just to give an example, on my Instagram account, the message that I sent had over 90 million views, and a couple of days later, it dropped to maybe 6 or 5 million. That's the people from within Iran responding to the message. So you can really map it and measure it that way. But then again, look, I don't think it is for any foreign government to designate who and what should be the alternative. It should be for the Iranian people to decide that. And what I am offering as a transitional leader is precisely a mechanism and a process whereby it's for the people of Iran to decide ultimately what they want and who do they want as their leaders. We're just providing the opportunity and the grounds for it. But in order to do that, you have to have a plan, you have to have an organization, you have to have structure, and that's exactly what we've been doing. And there's tremendous amount of coordinations within Iran. I think that once we have an opportunity to rise again, that will be able to be an element to demonstrate to the entire world. And I think you have to give the Iranian people the benefit of the doubt that once given an opportunity, they'll be able to finally rise and take over their country. That has been our ask. We want to take our country back. We just need to be rescued from this cell that the regime has created for us. We are hostages to this regime, and sometimes hostages cannot free themselves without outside help. That's why we need the outside help. The rest we will do.
Would you go back to Iran to take a role beyond just a transitional leader?
Well, as I said many times, I'm not running for office, but I think the people of Iran have followed me for the past 47 years. They've seen that I've been always committed to the same principles and ideals, which has remained committed to. It's all about having a secular democracy, democratic system replace this religious dictatorship. I think that Iran is a country that has proven throughout its civilization and culture how much it can contribute to the world, how much Iranians, unlike this regime, are aligned with the very same values that are often taken for granted in countries like the United States, the liberties that you enjoy here, and everything that we have that we'd like to have for ourselves inside Iran. It's an opportunity for us to make this happen. And All that is on my mind these days is that for a population of 90 million, and the majority of them are young, and in fact, most of the victims of the recent uprising are all in their late teens or early 20s. They are young people who are dying to have, more than two ways, they're dying because they're sacrificing themselves, but they are dying to have the opportunity to finally breathe freely. This is what it's all about. It's something that puts us back on a way to flourish, to succeed, to progress, and to be part of the community of free nations, and the impact it will have regionally. That's why I say, when Iranians look at themselves, they say, as a culture, we are friendly to our neighbors, we are friendly with anyone. We have been a country that for centuries has been a true nation state, full of different ethnicities and cultures and religions, and this has been the Iran that I've known and that I grew up with, and it will be the same Iran, even better in the future, a country liberated from a singular doctrine and ideology that has discriminated against its own citizens from the get-go. Women were the first victim. Religious minorities has to flee the country. And there are over 9 million Iranian expats who are hoping to be able to return home and help rebuild our country. This is an opportunity for us. It's in front of us. But it's not just an opportunity for us as Iranians. It's an opportunity for the world to finally be rid of the biggest cancer we had to face for the past 4 decades and put an end to every threat that this regime represents. It's good for liberating a nation. It's good for America's national security. But it's also good in terms of economic advantages. Let's not forget, Iran is a country that for the past 50 years has been inaccessible by a variety of companies or industries in the West that could find another untapped frontier. Just in the first 10 years, we estimate that in terms of return and economic impact, over $1 trillion worth could be getting back into U.S. economy as a result of trade and business in Iran, and of course the opportunity it would create for us. All of that is at stake. There's no way you can do business with this mafia-like corrupt regime, and this is an opportunity that will be beyond liberty, beyond human rights, beyond democracy, beyond stability. Also a huge, huge economic opportunity that is going to be win-win for the people of Iran and in the interest of this country.
I am also hoping to understand your perspective on some factions of your movement that have received some criticism. 2 people who support your cause were charged with the murder of Masoud Masjoudi, an anti-regime activist in Canada who was also a critic of yours. I want to be very clear that there is no link between you or your team and this alleged murder, but it does come in the context of a movement that has been accused of some harassing behavior. Some Iranian activists have told Politico that they've been threatened, doxxed, harassed by your supporters. A former U.S. official said your aides, quote, scare him. Are those actions from your supporters hurting your credibility as a potential future leader?
Look, I've always said as a matter of principle, and I've been very vocal about it and on the record about this, that I always condemn any behavior that is based on violence or insult or aggressivity of any kind to anyone that is active. And, I let my own supporters define themselves and describe themselves, but understand one thing. There has been a very, very orchestrated campaign by the regime to, in fact, create an element of discord by creating these conflicts within the opposition, trying to bring about these elements of contention. It's a very well orchestrated campaign, including trying to smear or discredit me or my supporters. I think the majority of Iranians who are today working together are joined in one common principle, and the principles that I have sort of drawn as the minimal conditions to be able to form a coalition are very simple to comprehend. It's Iran's territorial integrity, it's the clear separation of religion from government, it's the equality of all citizens under the law, and the right for the Iranian people to determine their own political future. On that, we have a very wide, diverse group of Iranians who are secular Democrats. Among them are Republicans, are monarchists, are people on the left, on the center, on the right. And as such, it represents the bulk of the Iranian opposition. Are they extremists every now and then in the mix? Of course they are. This is something that is unavoidable. But their behavior and comportment, if it begins to be in the direction of what you say, have always been condemned by me, and I think the majority of people who say we don't want to have anything to do with that. And if it does arise, we do condemn it. I have, and I'm sure others have too.
I want to talk briefly about President Trump's leadership. You know, you've praised the president as a man of action and a man of peace and aligned yourself close with the conservative movement here in the U.S. Do you see Trump's leadership style as a model for a future democratic leader of Iran, whether that's you or someone else?
Well, no. I think right now what we're talking about is what is the president of the United States, the strongest, more powerful country on the planet, doing to alleviate a problem that could be a game changer for the entire planet. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Is he the kind of president who sees that as a result of what will put an end to this regime, what kind of a positive consequence that can have for the world to finally breathe a sigh of relief that you no longer have this terrorist regime that is out there threatening its neighborhood, threatening the world with nuclear annihilation, radicalism, terrorism, missile strikes, and so on and so forth, in exchange for a nation that will say, hey, we are peace-loving people, we want to be an element of stability, we can work with our regional partners, whether they are the Arab countries or the Israelis, to bring about the element that will no longer require America or other Western nations to deploy their fleet to maintain security, whether it's maritime traffic or anything else in the region. We can do it ourselves. This is what's at stake. It's putting all the negatives associated with this regime and instead bring all the positives that I'm sure Iranians will quite clearly prove to be doing that. So whatever the president is doing now is very critical, not just for what it does in the interest of the United States and its interests, but also how it can have an impact in the region. That's really what's at stake here.
You mentioned people are naming streets after President Trump in Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu also told CBS News recently, quote, in Iran, they name streets after me. They call me Bibi June, beloved Bibi. Is that what you're hearing?
I'm sorry, say again.
He said, Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu just told CBS News, quote, in Iran, they name streets after me. They call me Bibi June, beloved Bibi. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, I think there's ample material in social media that you can see to the extent of how Iranians respond. And it's not just limited to the diaspora. A lot of people say, well, these are people outside, but also inside. Pre-internet blackout, that still exists in social media. You can do your own diligence and research it. It's already there. And yes, it confirms what you just said. A lot of sympathetic messages coming from Iran, praising President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu for having had the courage to step in and do something about the situation. And again, I hope that this internet blackout will ultimately be lifted and a lot more will probably come out as a result. To the extent that I know, in the meantime, despite the fact that for over 70 days now we've had no direct access to inside Iran, but some of the information that is trickling out that I have access to continues to demonstrate that the people are resilient. They're still hoping that this action will be taken to the very end. There's still hope that President Trump will do what needs to be done, and the Israelis are doing what they can from their aspect. But I think now we can start seeing perhaps even more direction for some of the countries that have become much more, how can I say, vocal about having been now subject to the regime's retaliation. I'm talking countries such as the UAE or Saudi Arabia, or other countries that have been targeted. It seems that the regime has even further isolated itself, and as a result, we're going to get much more information coming out of there. So it's a combination of the immediate region, but from inside Iran itself. And this is something that will only reaffirm that the Iranian people know what's at stake. They want this regime gone. They are prepared to see even more action taken by foreign countries that have been able to act militarily against this regime. And this is going to be for us another opportunity to finally overcome the regime's means to brutalize us, to silence us, or to repress us, and finally break free from the jail cells and take our country back. As I said, this is a liberation campaign for us, and we hope that in this case we'll be able to continue having the kind of support we need to get that done.
Yeah, finally, I started this conversation by asking you for your message to the Iranian people. What is your basic, fundamental message to the people here, here in Washington?
The message is simple. How many of you happen to know an Iranian friend or colleague or family? I'm sure many of you do. And I'm sure you've seen how they have behaved, how they have comported themselves, how much they appreciate the country in which they live. As a matter of fact, have you seen all the demonstrations that have occurred ever since January in multiple cities across the planet? In Australia, in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, and the kind of civility that Iranians have shown. Every country in which they demonstrate, they respect the flag of the country that hosts them. If it's America, it's the American flag. If it's in Canada, it's the Canadian flag. If it's in Germany, it's the German flag, and so on and so forth. They are respectful and they are appreciative of the country in which they live. And they would probably have told you, many of them, that had it not been for this regime that forced us to leave our country because we were Baha'is or because we were Jews or because we were, not straight or what have you, we would not have been forced to live. And now we live here. We appreciate the country in which we live. They're educated here. They're working here. They're contributing to their respective societies. But many of them would like to be able to go home. So imagine the best allies or the best ambassadors that they can be on behalf of, this time, America vis-a-vis Iran, or as Iranians living in the United States, no matter how you look at it. This is a wealth of human resources. This is the true measurable meaning of what kind of people are we dealing with. Are these the kind of people who will represent Iran's future, or a bunch of thugs that are now terrorizing our nation and executing athletes or singers inside Iran just for throwing stone in a protest? What are we going to be dealing with? Clearly, you have a sense of a liberated Iran and what it will mean to you as Americans, or I think, for that matter, other people in the world. And all they're asking is, say, have faith in us, help us overcome this evil that has put us in this place in the first place. And, we look at America in many sense as a country that has been and has proven that when you create opportunities, when it's a land of opportunities, that's where people can excel. We would like to have the same liberties, the same opportunities that America provides its citizens to our own citizens. So it's really a partnership in more than one way. So I hope that this is the way that you take it and understand that we have a common enemy, and that common enemy is nothing other than the Islamic regime that has nothing to do with the Iranian people, that is not representative of the Iranian people, that has no business being in Iran anymore, and hopefully will help us get rid of this cancer.
Mr. Pehlevi, thank you for joining the conversation and the summit. Thank you all for being here today.